Hello. Thought I'd introduce myself. My name is, you know, I'll be honest with you. This makes me uncomfortable as fuck. I'm not a, I'm not the type of guy that has an easy time in front of cameras, in front of people. I've never had an easy time with that. I had a difficult time giving my MBA speeches in front of a classroom of 24 to 36 and everything. I would actually blank out. I would have a difficult time with it. But I feel like homeless people are getting a bad rap here in Studio City, and not just Studio City, but the world. And I figured it's my responsibility to show you, to basically say, we're real people. We've got a history. Got a lot of shit that we could have gone through that put us here and everything. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all equation that actually got us to this point. So I wrote up. Sorry, I keep looking up. Nervous habit and everything. I'm going to get over it. I wrote a little list here of things I'm going to discuss, and it's going to be like a long dissertation, if you will. But I'm going to explain what's gone on. First, I made a little selfie stick. Let's see if you can see it. It's kind of funny, I know. But I just created my own. I have a little thing that I have. It's just, I'm nervous. Do you believe that? I'm nervous. Now I'm the only person here. But I'd like to show you my lifestyle and what I've been going through for the last 4 years altogether. This isn't a fun time or anything like that. I don't have bills and I don't have a lot of things that I'm responsible for, but what I also don't have is a relationship, a proper bed. If you can see this, see my little area over here? Let's take a look. I'm out of Starbucks where I normally hang out, and I'll let you see where I'm actually at. This is the area that I sleep in, that I have been for about 4 years altogether. And right across there, oops, sorry, it's Universal Park. My tent. And my life. So, it's probably going to be boring. I know, I'm setting myself up for failure already, right? But, what got me here? I'll go to list 1. Greetings, my name is Q, aka Brian Scott Gregory. That's my adoptive name. And I've named myself Q, based on the character in Star Trek. I thought it was fucking awesome what he did. I love traveling, and he can actually snap his fingers and be anywhere, anytime, or create a new fictional world, or do anything that he wanted to. Conjure up a couple women. Tell you what, I'd love to have that right about now. And he just did a lot of things that really made me look at life differently, just by being a fictional character. Now, I'm not so convinced it's a fictional character anymore, but I'll get to that in a bit. But just getting into my background, I was born and raised here in California, Yorba Linda, and I ended up moving with my mom and dad from here to Glendale, Arizona, over in 1980. So it's been a while that I've moved over there. And when I was 11 years old, I won a contest for an Atari 600 XL computer. And at that point, that actually started my programming career. So at that point, I'm going to get to what led me being homeless by basically detailing my career and my life. So sorry for meandering on that topic and everything. I do that quite a bit. But So I started programming computers back when I was 11 years old. I bought a book called 101 Basic Programs by David All. Phenomenal book, and it had all kinds of things in it. It had games, it had tic-tac-toe, Star Trek, Hammer-Rubai, all these different little programs that one by one I entered over summertime and just basically saw, how code works, basic code, and got to go through step by step and actually see what goes on and how to actually get a computer program to work, what variables are, how to actually make changes, alterations. Sometimes I didn't like the way the game played, so I just made alterations here and there, trying different things out, occasionally getting it to crash, and finding out the hard way what being a developer really was. It's not always easy, and it's a lot of trial and error, trying shit out and everything. So 11 years old, I started doing that. By the time I was 13 and 14, I was going with my brother or with friends over to Sears and typing in a program, 10 print fuck you, 20 go to 10, and at that point it would start looping over and over again on all the computers over at Sears, where me and my brother, we would run out of the store laughing as the white-haired ladies would give us shit and try and chase us down and everything, not knowing how to stop the program. So that was just good childish fun. That's what got me started. By the time I was 17 and 18, I was moving out of the house, and I bought my first XT-based computer, and at that point ended up starting to get onto bulletin board services using a 1200 baud, 2400 baud, up to 9600 baud modem. And at that point, that's when I discovered the bulletin boards and something called FidoNet, and at that point turned around and I started increasing my hacking skills by taking things that had actually been posted to these sites and stripping off copy protection from them. For instance, Leisure Suit Larry, King's Quest. Back then, there was quite a few games and everything that was posted up on the sites that required key disks. So the old 5 1/4 inch hard drive or 5 1/4 inch drives, you actually had to put a disk in, and you had to have the original disk by the original manufacturer, and I just basically put hacking code in to circumvent that kind of stuff. So that's what got me into assembler, was basically reverse engineering the code at an assembly level. And at that point, I had started work over at a company called Orbital down in Chandler, Arizona, or Tempe, Arizona. My dad helped me get that job, and I turned around and started. I worked in QA. It started off as a receiver for the company, just entry-level job, working a forklift and everything. It wasn't skilled labor. It was pretty rough sometimes, but it was actually a fun job, and I ended up reorganizing the receiving department, made it a hell of a lot more efficient so they can actually get the parts in and out faster, working with computers. And I ended up getting a job with receiving inspection, quality assurance. So I spent 2 years in quality assurance, but at the same time I was also learning how to hack the mainframe. So they had a DEC system and a VAX VMS system that were all interlinked all together. I didn't know at the time they were doing secret and top secret work, and I found out the hard way they were, and they ended up seeing that I hacked into the payroll system, and I was just nosy. I was trying to actually find out how I could elevate my own worth by more or less hacking and seeing what everybody else was making. I knew that I was being underpaid for my position in QA. I wanted to see how much. When I went to go ask for my next raise, I was trying to put things in my favor a little bit. I came to find out I was highly underpaid. I was doing more work than the other guys. So at that point, I ended up leveraging that information to my benefit and got myself a substantial raise. So, sorry I have a cold today. But they saw the hacking. They actually had traces in that let them see what I was doing. And it was really fundamental, easy stuff that I was doing, but I managed to break through consistently, and it was just a funny little hack, and I helped them repair it, and they actually offered me a job, or at that point it was a job or jail, and I took the job. Made the mistake of taking a job. Just kidding. No, I took the job. I enjoyed it. Started off as a junior programmer at that point, making, I think it was maybe $4 an hour more as a junior programmer, and At that point, they introduced me to Microtech C and assembler, and I had 90 days to prove myself by basically doing a full conversion of some flight software that they had. Orbital, if you don't know, does rockets and guidance and navigation systems and all kinds of funky stuff, especially for NASA. So I ended up doing a full conversion of their primary rockets called LEAP, Lightweight Exo-Atmospheric Projectile, and did a full conversion for that program from basically this Motorola 68000 style assembler over to C, Microtech C. And 90 days, I didn't know assembler, and my skills at C were not good, but they got good pretty quick. Fortunate part for me was I'd gotten married at 18 years old. I was 21 years old at this time, and I was fucking miserable and just having a hell of a time. I was drinking too much, and this offered me the opportunity to overcome my divorce and work 100 hours a week. And at that point, I was introduced to a man by the name of Todd Bjerke, who hands down is probably one of my favorite managers I've ever had. So I hope all this comes through. I'm not even going to check it at first, and I'm just going to keep on chugging through this thing as I go. So it's going to suck if I'm going to have to redo this. But anyways, long story short, Todd introduced me and helped me with assembler in C. Lightweight exo-atmospheric projectile, aka LEAP, was a ICBM interceptor. So what it was supposed to do was track and target an incoming ICBM, like from Russia or North Korea or something like that, and basically triangulate it and more or less intercept it midway to make it so where it didn't explode. It exploded over water rather than exploding over the continental U.S. or something like that. So I got to work with, some pretty amazing guys over there. Guys that were doing guidance and navigation stuff I had no clue. I mean, I had known, and I didn't do that well in math in high school, but I was introduced to trigonometry, to calculus, to trajectory calculations, and at this point, just quite a few little things. And then, as time went on, I got to understand it pretty well, and I got to understand coding pretty well too. Reverse engineering, memory management, you name it. Card tools was a case tool program, so I got to understand data flow diagrams and all this fun computer junk, and spent about 5 years altogether over at Orbital. It was like a little fraternity for me, and I realized that at that point I'd been having a good time being single, but I also knew that my credibility as a programmer suffered because I didn't have a degree. So at that point, I ended up taking a voluntary leave when they ended up cutting back on the defense budget, and took a voluntary cut from there. Ended up leaving, and at that point, I ended up going to ASU on a full-time basis. While there, I lived my life and had some fun times, and ended up rushing a fraternity, the Pi Kappa Alpha, the Pikes. And I was not a jock at that time, and I was offered to come into that fraternity, which was a jock, very much a sports fraternity, which I wanted to understand sports guys' mentalities. I actually wanted to get along with them. I liked partying, and I knew we had that in common. So I ended up, getting an offer from them in Delta Sigs, which, if I had life to live over, I might have taken the route of the Delta Sigs, because they were nerdy guys, and they had some funny practical jokes that they did, but I still had a good time with the Pikes. But it's not the fraternity to be in if you're actually an engineering major. It's two of us engineering majors, 48 people in the house, and at that point, I ended up failing calculus twice. Third time I passed it. In physics, I failed the first time, and second time I bombed it even worse than I did the first time. And I just did not, for the life of me, understand physics. And in the end, it's between calculus and the poor grades in physics that tanked my GPA, and I was suspended for a year. So I'd made the determination at that point, maybe a computer science engineering major, which was what I was pursuing there, wasn't necessarily for me, or maybe there was something wrong. So at that point, I ended up starting to consult. So at that point, I just ended up starting to get into a full-time job over at U-Haul. I had a friend that had left Orbital, and he went to U-Haul. And at that point, I ended up getting introduced to Fox Pro, C++, Clipper, a whole bunch of different database management type stuff and everything. And I met Mike Moore was the one that got me over there. And he was, I lost touch with that guy a long time ago. I always wonder what happened to him. But we got a guy down here in the parking lot. He's probably going to be wondering what the hell I'm doing. So I'm going to walk over here because for some reason I am conscious about my image. I actually do care. I'll get back up there in a bit because I like that stance. So, back in the tent. So I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Ron Austrian. Now Ron was an interesting character just because he was actually vice president for U-Haul. The guy was maybe at that point 4 years younger than me, or older than me. And how he had gotten the vice president position just bewildered me. I mean, but the guy was amazing at what he did. He, hands down, was just... one time I walked into his office. He's got 8 computers in his office. And on one of the computers, he's built his own version of DOS. From the ground up, he actually created his own version of DOS to handle the call center there. And it just made me wonder, about myself and about my own skills. I mean, I thought I was a decent programmer, but I didn't realize that there was, guys like this out there that were, I actually considered gods. The guy was just fucking amazing. So, anyways, reason I'm getting so much into him is he inspired me an awful lot. He got me thinking about code and life and all of that junk differently. And, from that point forward, we forged a relationship and a friendship that persisted for quite a while after that. So, shortly after that, I ended up taking a job up at the Mirage Hotel and Casino. I consulted in the Phoenix area for a little bit, but I ended up going to work for the Mirage Hotels and Casinos up in Las Vegas, and spent a year there. Ron actually knew somebody up there, and he's the one that got me up there on that contract. And the two of us worked together, and we ended up doing the user interface for the system and did a good deal of the middle tier. So it's a 3-tiered system. Middle tier was created in Visual C++. Got to work with that and caching systems. A SQL Server backend, and that's actually my first major exposure to SQL Server that I actually got to work with it on a pretty religious basis. And then the front end was all done with a VB 6.0. And at that point, I absolutely fell in love with Visual Basic. I'd been using it before, but not professionally. But at that point, I ended up saying, if any language is built just specifically for me, it's that language. So after that, I ended up read my notes. See, at that point, I ended up getting back, and I got into another marriage, second marriage at this point. Let's see if this guy is gone. Nope. So I got into another marriage, this time to Lisa. I'm not going to name the first one, but Lisa Milet, aka Lisa Gregory. And at that point, I ended up, it was a much healthier relationship for me. And like me, she was a sex addict too, which worked very well for the two of us. And it was a very supportive relationship too. So we ended up going from there, and we ended up moving down to Gilbert. So she was a stripper. That's the funny thing. So I think that's why I got along with her so well. Just like I love going to the strip clubs, and she enjoyed being at them, herself, for different reasons. So now it was about 1997 when I got back from Vegas. We ended up tying the knot. It was before then, before I went to Vegas, and I was taking flights back and forth from Phoenix to Vegas for the first year. Actually, we got married in 95. 96, we ended up, I took that contract, and for the entire year of 96, I ended up going back and forth every weekend, flying back and forth between there and Vegas. So for the next year and a half when I got back, I took a job with Intel, did some contract work here and there. That's when I made the most that I've ever made. Started at $150 an hour, and I was making bank at that point. It's equivalent to $300,000 a year. I had one month where I think I cleared $35,000, just for a freaking month, and that was all. I mean, it's all 1099 basis. So in 1999, I ended up finding a couple partners, and me and those partners opened up our own company. Now, I had several consulting firms by then, but each one was more or less to basically clear the cash that I was making on a consulting basis. And I had a personal goal to make $1 million by the time I was 30, and as it turned out, I did hit it. In part with the company that I actually opened up with these other partners. I had $1 million in personal assets in the bank by the time I was 30. So we opened up this company called Touchscape, and what we did there was we created a help system for companies that needed their databases. I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this that actually makes sense. It was a .com company, prior to the implosion of the .coms. And what it did was it scoured the internal databases of companies, and particularly their files, their help support systems, and that kind of stuff. It created a look and feel just like their website that they had, and it took the information that we acquired from their databases and populated it on their website to basically provide help support systems for customer support, type stuff and everything, as a first level of customer support. So it worked out pretty well with what we were doing, and it took a lot of customization, but on a repetitive basis, it made it very easy for anybody to leverage our stuff to get the information from their internal systems and expose it to the outside world. So we did that, and we ended up getting companies like Ping, we got China Mist, we got other companies like that. And at the time, I was experimenting with artificial intelligence, so something called heuristics programming, learning systems. And what I was doing was something called weighted and aging algorithms. So I was heavy into trying to determine, the relevance of information that we would acquire from the internal databases and from the internal file systems and file structures based on the date and time that had been received. And at that point, weighting that higher based on its age, and also based on other factors that we would actually determine on a per customer basis. So that was actually part of the fun that I had. Was it was my first foray into artificial intelligence, and I built a pretty, really what I considered a pretty cool system, as the back end. Now, I was the only developer at first. We had Brian Hoover, he was the chief operating officer, and we had Dwight DePalmer, and he was, he called himself the chief technical officer, but he really wasn't. I mean, I was more or less the chief information officer or chief technical officer. He wanted to learn more about tech, but he was more sales and marketing. So he tried to actually develop his skills, with me, and we ended up having a lot of powwows and a lot of headbutts too as a result of his desire to learn more about the tech than I was willing to actually let him have. And that's actually what started causing some problems between us. Well, at the same time I'm having problems there, I'm having problems with my marriage. Now, I've only been married 5 years at this point, by 2000. And about then, I ended up catching... See if these guys still here. Yeah, he's there, but I'll go ahead and talk. So, see? Look. So, about this point, I ended up... we were doing the first round for... our first round for a customer, America West Airlines, and we had just received $25 million in our third round financing from venture capitalists and angel companies. And at that point, it just ended up getting into heated debate between me and primarily Dwight, that And at that point, he started leveraging other personnel in the company to more or less, try to pit him against me and make himself look right. Well, it got to the point where it got ridiculous. And it was about this time I ended up, I was pulling several all-nighters, and I ended up catching some hackers. And the hackers were hacking our database and pulling our source code. And I caught them in the middle of pulling it, and at that point I ended up disabling their connection, tracing, prior to me disabling it, I traced their connection back to actually find out where they were coming from. Found out they were in a house in Phoenix. I actually located their address, and at that point I contacted Cox Communications. I also contacted the FBI and contacted the police. And they were actually at that point more interested in trying to eliminate hackers and eliminate white-collar crime big time at that point because of the .com considerations for venture capital. So at that point, I ended up getting a play-by-play, and come to find out, those two men that were apprehended at the address that I sent, they had a lot of computers there, and come to find out, they were actually employees of the NSA. So that was in 2000, either the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. It was actually the end of 2000 because for the next solid year at that point, I ended up getting, first off, I got to meet those two gentlemen. And for the next year after that, I had their boss and a couple other people that were very, very persistent about knocking on my door and asking me to come work for them. And I wasn't interested. I mean, I had a company. I had, at this point, first round was for $3 million. The second round was for $15 million. Third round was for $25 million. We had 54 employees. But my marriage was tanking. I was not having, a good time with that. And it had nothing to do with stripping. It just had to do with the fact that I felt like she had become more like a brother or a sister, I should say. It just, the relationship went weird real quick. So as that went on, as my debate and discussion and fight with Dwight, and which escalated to Brian, which they had brought in external personnel, a life coach, in order to try to help us resolve. The life coach said something pretty profound that actually made me think. And I needed to hear it too. And the life coach just basically said he doesn't want to hear what we have to say. And it's the first time that I actually had somebody point out that I wasn't as open-minded as I had thought I was, and I needed a fundamental shift. Well, that combined with everything else hit me and spiraled me into a huge depression, and I ended up going back to work over at Intel. Right about this point was when America West tanked as well. That's the part of the big, huge debate that we had was my coworkers were wanting to place everything in the company to go towards America West. I myself wasn't interested in that because of, simple diversification. You don't place, for a startup, all your hope, all your dreams into one company, You got to make sure that you can appeal towards, all the companies that we're appealing towards. It was just fundamentally flawed, argument in my belief. Well, I was vindicated, 9/11 happened. They had taken the entire company by the time I left and retooled it, focusing primarily on the airline industry. Well, the airline industry went tits up. At that point, once all that started happening with, the 9/11 planes flying into the sides of buildings and all that kind of stuff, well, it was like, it was a weird form of justice for me. It's just like, I told you so, the company went down, those two ended up suing each other, everybody in the company lost their paychecks. It was just bad news altogether. But it got me also thinking again too, really questions I probably shouldn't have asked. What's the relationship of me to the events of 9/11? Is there any relationship? It seems coincidental, right? So, time went on, and as time went on, I ended up working over at Intel for another year, and I was horribly depressed. I just wasn't having a good time with life. I was beating myself up for another failure in marriage, and at that point I started drinking pretty heavily again, and I just said fuck it. I ended up saying okay. I took the I had taken the job offer, from the NSA. This is prior to 9/11, and that I actually signed up for the contract. And the contract that I signed up for was a portion of my company. So it's the whole sequence of events. It's not fuzzy. I'm jumping around a little bit, but the 9/11 thing happened. But I sold out a full year prior to them, and the amount that I sold out for was $1 million a year for every year that I'm in service. With the NSA, which is 6 to 8 years guaranteed. I go through the same training that everybody else does, which is basically I go through basic training with the military service of my choice. Preference was the Navy or the Army. And at that point, everybody that's in the NSA or the CIA, there's no exceptions to this, that's my understanding anyways, has to go through basic training in order to get into the CIA or the NSA. So by the time 2002 rolls around, my start date commences. At this point, I'm not giving jack shit when it comes down to concerns over the contract that they signed with me. At this point, America West is, and the whole airline industry is gone, and I think to some degree they kind of banked on the interest that they had in my company actually being worth more than it could possibly be. But because of the airline industry, I don't know. I'm not going to even wager. All I know is they were looking for artificial intelligence stuff when they ended up trying to hack my systems. They were interested in the things I was creating. So they had a long-term interest in my hacking capabilities ever since I got on their radar at the age of 17, 18 years old, when the FBI was made aware of my presence and everything. So anyways, 2002 hits, and I ended up going into basic training over at Fort Knox. Shortly after that, I got shipped over to Fort Meade for my advanced training, and that training included the private contractor training for the NSA, and that's actually where I met Mr. Edward Snowden, and oddly enough, devoid in any media I've seen, his wife. The guy, according to what he told me, was a trained lawyer. So I never struck me as a programmer, and to be honest, the stuff that I've seen about what he's put in the media, that guy's not a programmer. He sucks. We all went through training in public affairs or interrogation. He was in public affairs, and so was I. There was repetitive number again, 48. 48 people in our class altogether. I was second in the class. I have no fucking clue where he was, but my roommate was number one in the class. Jared Hines, I think the guy's name was. But in there, it's just like, I ended up, while everybody's going through the process there, nobody's supposed to tell anybody that we're going through this training, that we're here to join the NSA or the CIA, and this is a part of what we do here. So I've got the contract that's for 6 to 8 years, and I stick it out. So at this point, I'll get back to this, make sure I didn't miss anything. So at this point, once I got out, the first thing they did was they sent me back to Intel for 6 months' time, and then at that point they ended up sending me to, they sent me over to Eastern Europe to start recruiting. So I started recruiting for, in Eastern Europe, primarily Romania, Bulgaria. Got to meet with quite a few hackers here and there, and I was just responsible for vetting them. So I would go through, talk to them, make sure their skills were everything they claimed it was. And I met some really amazing people. I had some fun times over there too. So I started off in Germany, went from Munich all the way to Czech Republic, Prague. I went to a place called Český Krumlov, which is down south in Czech Republic. Went from there over to Poland to Slovakia down to Hungary, to Budapest. I spent probably about 2 weeks over in Budapest, and ended up from there going over to a place called Cluj-Napoca, Romania. Went and sightsaw a lot. I spent a lot of time in Romania, probably about a little bit more than a month, and I say a lot, it's not really a whole lot of time. So I went to a place called Sighisoara. I got to see the Dracula's castle over in Braun. Went to a place called Suceava, which was kind of a shithole over in the north towards Moldova, and went to Bucharest, which really is a shithole. It's an armpit. I'm very not impressed with that city. I ended up, I was drunk one night and I asked for a prostitute, and apparently prostitution's illegal there, and I ended up having the police try to apprehend me, and the hostel owner ended up getting me out of trouble on that one. So that ended up going from there to Sofia, Bulgaria, down to Athens, Greece, and from there I took a ferry over to Bari, Italy over to Rome, spent a little bit of time in Rome checking out the Vatican and all that kind of stuff. And then took a trip for the first time in my life to Amsterdam. That was just a little side trip that I took, and I was interested in, I had a history with alcohol, and I was curious about these things called hallucinogenics. So I went there with the sole intention of trying out, for the first time, mushrooms. And come to find out, I had a great fucking time. It was mind-opening, eye-opening. Started seeing the world in altogether different ways after that. I'm not talking literally, I'm talking figuratively at first. It was just a very different experience, nothing I ever expected it to be. I saw ground rolling. There's a helicopter overhead. Sounds were emphasized, I could see forever, hear forever. It was just so freakishly bizarre. I never thought my own senses were capable of doing what they did when I was on mushrooms. So, but I wasn't experimenting much after that. So from there, flip over to the second. So from there I ended up getting back to the U.S. and ended up going right back to Phoenix, and I started consulting for various firms, doing that were interested in globalization, and that was the NSA's. NSA serves two primary functions. One of it's military, and the other one's corporate. Now, the corporate is they're reforming the social aspect of the corporation right now. But the corporate isn't there to serve the military, and that's one thing that's very important. That was made explicitly for me. We weren't to cross-pollinate per se. They were interested in maintaining autonomy in the relationships, and basically I, as a corporate sponsor, was more or less responsible for going and teaching companies actually how to do business globally, teaching about how to actually bypass some of the rules and regulations, both in our country and in other countries, in order to do business in some cases, and in many cases, just helping them create the software and systems and everything that would be responsible for doing that business. So I'm not going to give any real for instances, just for purposes, that should be pretty obvious at this point. But at the same time, I was also asked to hack on occasion, and I was told that based on my discretion, I could say yes or no to those things. More often than not, I did it. I didn't mind it. It's a way to keep up to date with my skills and everything. But those occasions that I said no, and in the end, it's those occasions that actually started getting my ass handed to me. So by the time 2005 hits, I know it's a tremendously long story about why I'm homeless, isn't it? By the time 2005 hits, I'm recovered mentally. 2006, I'm deciding to pursue my bachelor's, full time at this point. Finish it off by, I should say, I have by this point probably 200 credit hours in miscellaneous classes, because I've taken classes pretty much since high school, but never really focused on getting a degree, after ASU. So I ended up using the University of Phoenix, and ended up working way too much and working even harder to get the education, and pursued a marketing degree with the assistance of a little substance, cocaine. And I, in part, did it because of the fun. Fucking love the feeling. I'll be the first to admit it. Now, I know what you're probably saying by now. My downfall, my homelessness situation is because of the drugs. And I'm going to say, you could think that's one perspective. But it's really everything altogether. If you're gonna focus solitarily on the drugs being the solitary reason, living life is what got me here. I made choices, and Those choices I generally speaking enjoyed. I don't regret them. I had fun with them. So it's getting a little windy here. So, and my reason for doing it was part of the reason that I ended up breaking up with my second wife was I didn't like her friends. A lot of our friends, particularly the ones that were strippers and everything, they were hard partiers, and they used cocaine quite a bit. I had a couple friends myself that used cocaine, and I realized I was judging them. I didn't like myself for judging them, and not only that, I didn't like how my marriage suffered because of the constant battles that me and my ex would have over what friends she should and shouldn't have. So anyways, it says 20% of battery remaining. I might have to get to this tomorrow, but I'll beat this to the chase. So at that point, I ended up meeting girl Jackie, and she was my drug buddy. Love Jackie to this day, still love her. Wish I would have asked her to marry me. I ended up finishing off my bachelor's and my master's degree, and I got a bachelor's in marketing and a master's in business, international business administration. Polished that business, the master's off in 2009, promptly was sent to overseas. My contract was from 2003 to 2011 with the NSA, and by the time 2011 hit, I had quite a bit in personal assets in the bank. I was expected to get a nice fat paycheck from them too. And 2011 hits and I don't see it. I got sent overseas, for the last stint, and I was expected to stay with them. I went to Singapore, Hong Kong, London, Paris, worked for 6 months over there. I had a great time with it, but to be honest, I was done with government work. I didn't like a lot of the people that were asking me to do some of the things I just didn't want to do, and I kept getting in trouble for saying no to some of the hacking things they were asking me to do. So I just finally said I walked away from it. And I told, at the end, Warren Buffett actually offered me a job as CIO for Geico, and I said no, I'm not interested. And he insisted, and I told him, respectfully speaking, sir, you could take the job and shove it up your ass. Well, that's not the right thing to say. So I had $3 million in personal assets spread through E-Trade, Ameritrade, all these other bank accounts. I had a condo down in Costa Rica. It was Guanacaste, Costa Rica. All of them were seized. Everything, all my assets were seized. So I ended up finding this out literally 3 hours after that meeting with Warren Buffett. Everything I had done, completely seized, and I was refused. Absolutely refused to have any compensation for my work or contract with the NSA. So, long story getting longer here. I went ballistic. I went crazy. I had no assets, nothing in the bank. I had 2 storage units, one that had already been seized too, and I had a car, and I had $140,000 in debt that I thought I had. I was acquiring a better credit rating by having that debt, which I could have paid off in a heartbeat, but now I didn't have any cash for it. So $200,000 in student loans for the master's degree. And I ended up going crazy. At that point, I tried to commit suicide. I saw some really weird shit on the way out, and I really did question my sanity. And in the end, I'm going to end it here by basically saying I walked away from the corporate world because I had $3 million in personal assets that were stolen from me. No way to actually get in touch with the government or anybody that would represent me from a legal perspective. Nothing but circumstantial evidence for who I worked for and what I did during that time. And I left the country. I ended up going down to all the way down from Tijuana, hitchhiking all the way down to Panama. I bounced couches, lived with friends and family. Mom and dad helped me through rehab prior to then. But at that point, I was so utterly disgusted with my country and, my service. I just basically said, this just isn't worth it, and walked away from the entire thing. And I came back, and now I'm back here in Universal City, as you can see. That's where I'm at. That's the park. And, my story really just goes to say I've been clean for 6 years, from the cocaine. I had some bath salts that I took in the end, too. That really, really mentally made me look at the world very differently. And it all started with hallucinogenics down over in Amsterdam, as far as experiencing and understanding the world from a different perspective. And as far as being Q is concerned, it's my belief that the human mind, a well-trained human mind, has the capacity to be able to snap our fingers and be anywhere, anytime. If you look at physics, the underlying physics of matter, you break down biology to chemicals, to the chemistry, to the atoms. Underlying those atoms is, energy. And underlying that energy is thought. And if I have the thought to basically alter the construct of this thing called reality, I'm not going to have to pay for plane tickets, to get places. I'm going to be able to snap my fingers and be anywhere, anytime. But I think I put myself through those drug experiences basically as a way of subconsciously teaching me about what the mind's possible and what it's capable of, and how much it's almost indistinguishable between that and insanity at times. My entire life experience, I'm at the point now as being a homeless guy that I don't blame anybody for my situation. It's my fault. My life choices, that I don't regret. Now, there's some life experiences that I want to go back and do again. I would love to actually go back to certain moments in time. Jackie danced for me all night, one night. I would love to go back to that moment in time. Maybe spending some time with some family and friends that are no longer with us. That would be one other possibility. Another possibility is if I actually do learn how to, when I do learn how to bend space and time and snap my fingers and instantly be over in London, having a drink of Guinness at a pub, and maybe 5 minutes later I snap my fingers again, I'm over in Hong Kong having my favorite noodle dish at the base of Times Square there. When I can do these things, I'm going to be, sitting here going, wow. I had always limited my own belief system to believe that reality and what's possible is grounded, and the things that were in fiction were the limitations. That's just not possible in my world. I've come to since believe otherwise, and come to believe that the entire set of experiences I've had, has been creating this being known as Brian that I now call my own version of Q, much like the version of Q in Star Trek. And the experiences that I've had in this homelessness is just basically understanding that to some degree it can be a lonely adventure. It's no walk in the park. It is in a way. Clearly there's a park over there. But in a figurative sense, it's no walk in the park, being homeless. I don't struggle for food. I haven't done drugs in 6 years. Don't really want to. Doesn't mean I'll never do them again. There's certain times and places I wouldn't mind experiencing hallucinations just to advance and experience and develop and educate my mind a little bit more. And that's actually what I've existed on this planet for. It's just I've enjoyed the experience. I've had fun with it. Sometimes it doesn't look like it. I know I could be a bit too serious at times, and I have a hard time talking to a camera that I know is going to go out, and maybe, a grand total of 10 people are going to see. But the fact of the matter is, I've had a good experience, for this thing called life for the first part of my life. And I believe that Doctor Who and Star Trek and all this stuff is nothing more than a window into a different world. And while we call them actors here, those people that are actually being acted like actually exist in other worlds. And that's all I want to do, is just basically teach myself how to be one of those people, that most people are going to regard as fiction. I've got a 13-page resume. Most people have a hard time agreeing that resume represents me. Some believe that parts of it are fictional. I've actually gotten quite a few people that have responded with, it made me laugh. It's just like, okay, I'm not going to ask what part made you laugh. Most people feel that a resume that's 2 to 3 pages, it should be all that you put out. I'm sorry, I'm just not interested in dumbing down my experiences, for your little mind. I know that sounds narcissistic, egotistical, and that's fine. But simple fact of the matter is, I've enjoyed life this far. And I've got quite a few people, Rachel, Jackie. If I was a Doctor Who for America, I would love to actually go back in time, pick them up in specific moments in time, and take them on a journey, and it's not going to be the rated PG-13 violent epic and everything that the British version is. It's going to have some sex involved. And you bet your ass the number one here guy, that still feels like he's 20, is going to be doing it too, especially with some of these women and everything. Hedonism. It's kind of fun, right? But in the meantime, as a homeless guy, life is what it is. Could be better. I spend my days at Starbucks just chilling out and writing a lot. I play a lot of video games, and I read a lot, and I'm researching temporal mechanics. And I feel like I understand time better than probably 99.9% of the people in this world, and the other 0.1% leverage it to their benefit to make money. And I'm not interested in money like that. That was the lesson that I learned, was quit focusing on the money and focus more on the fun. If I could play practical jokes across time, because I'm a big practical joker, and that's part of what got me into hacking to begin with, I'd play practical jokes across time. I would create different worlds, not like a computer simulation, but like a real place and everything, and maybe go visit some of my friends and family that didn't know that I had these capabilities, and do little things like hide their keys, put their keys in various locations, or just do subtle little things that you're always dismissing as just being, hey, it's my own memory. No, it's cute. Fucking with you. Anyways, that's the story of my life thus far. We've got another big story that I'm writing concerning Superman in the year 2920, and he's communicating with me, and to some degree I'm letting my mind believe that fiction and fact are one and the same, and I'm structuring reality around that concept just because it sounds like it could be fun. If I can actually snap my fingers and create two beautiful women right here, or create a planet that's made of nothing but blue aliens like James Cameron, and with the Avatar, only it's real and you can go there. Maybe I could film things there. I guess I want to be a different kind of filmmaker, and that's among the reasons I'm doing this thing too. I'm trying to get used to my presence being seen. I'm trying to get comfortable in front of a camera, right? I'm just trying to have fun, more fun in life, trying to add levity. And I know that knowing that I'm being watched is going to change my demeanor. It will change my attitude ultimately too. When I came out about the drugs, that was one of the toughest moments in my life, and I lost almost all my friends as a result of it. But it's a journey that I hope one day I can actually go back in time, or maybe laterally in time, and just basically go to their worlds and say, hey, I still love you. I just became a different person. I was ready for that adventure. And in an infinite world, an infinite universe, I discovered anything's possible, and I discovered hard evidence for that. Through something silly. A little trip to Amsterdam. You don't have to believe it. Nobody does. All I need is me. Unfortunately. And fortunately. Anyways, thank you for listening.